You don't notice it at first because silence doesn't scream. It waits. It grows inside the things that are no longer said. The first thing that disappears isn't a book. It's a question. A word a child would have whispered in a hallway after reading something that didn't match what the world told them. But when that book's gone, the question never gets asked. The curiosity dries up before it ever becomes thought. And that's the real beginning. Not the burning, not the banning, not the shelf being cleared, but the exact second a young mind stops itself from wondering. You sit in the classroom. The walls are clean, too clean. No posters, no quotes, no authors from the margins of history. Just flags and rules. You're given books, approved ones, polished, dead, hollow ones. They tell stories, sure, but not about you. Not about your body, your confusion, your skin, your family, your silence, your fears. They speak of straight lines and perfect endings, of history that forgets the blood, of love that only happens one way, of people who always look like the winners. The rest, they've been removed for review, or under reconsideration, or not age appropriate, or divisive. But the words they don't say are louder, unacceptable, unwelcome, unreal. You're 13. You feel wrong, but you don't know why. You're too scared to ask. And even if you wanted to, there's nothing left in the library that matches the shape of what you're feeling, because someone took the mirror off the wall. You walk in between the shelves. What's left are encyclopedias, military history, and novels with love stories that never touch race or gender or queerness. You touch the spine of a dusty book and wonder if it ever spoke about someone like you, but no one can tell you anymore, because no one's allowed to say it out loud. And slowly, the part of you that used to ache for belonging learns to stay silent too. At home, your parents say it's for the best, that kids don't need to read about that kind of stuff, that it's just politics. But it never felt like politics when you were staring at the ceiling, trying to understand your body. It never felt like politics when your skin burned from the way they looked at you in town. It never felt like politics when you kissed someone in secret and didn't know if it meant you were broken. And now, the words that could have named you have been erased before they could ever find your mouth. You dream of a different shelf, one with spines in bright colors, titles written by people who bled for the right to speak. People like you, people like the ghost you're becoming. But in this school, in this town, in this room, you're alone. Not because no one else feels it, but because everyone's been taught to pretend they don't. And the silence, it's heavier than hate. Because at least hate acknowledges your existence, but censorship erases you and then tells you you were never here. You lie awake that night and try to remember a phrase you once read, something about resistance, about language being power, but you can't find it. You don't know if it was real. You don't know if it was yours. You don't know if you imagined it. Because in the end, the worst kind of censorship is the one that rewrites memory. And you wonder, if no one ever tells your story, were you ever real to begin with? You come back years later, not as a student, but as someone trying to remember what it felt like before everything disappeared. The library is still here, but it doesn't smell like books anymore. It smells like dust and disinfectant, like a place waiting to forget. You walk between the shelves again, but this time, your footsteps echo differently, like you're trespassing in a place you were once supposed to belong. You remember a girl, maybe 15, who used to sit on the floor in the back corner, reading with her knees tucked under her. She always hid the cover, as if the title itself could get her in trouble. You never spoke to her, but you knew she was looking for something that no one had the courage to teach. Now, that corner's gone, replaced by a motivational poster and a stack of board games that no one checks out. You run your finger along the shelf. The books left behind are clean, too clean, scrubbed of anything that could light a match inside a quiet mind. It's not that they banned books about war or about sex or about violence. No, those still exist. But books about surviving as yourself, those are gone. They weren't too graphic. They were too true. And truth in places like this is dangerous if it makes people feel seen. Because when someone sees themselves in a story, they start to believe they deserve one. And that is what they fear the most. You sit in what used to be the LGBTQ plus section. It doesn't have a name now. Just numbers. Just silence. The kids here now don't even know what's missing. Because if you erase the word before they learn it, they'll grow up believing it never existed. They'll think their questions are abnormal, that their pain is nameless, that their identity is an infection instead of a variation of truth. That's how control works. Not by chaining the body, but by starving the language. You reach for a book that once saved someone's life. It's not there. Of course, it's not there. It was labeled controversial, as if existence could be debated, as if loving someone, or questioning who you are, or daring to write your pain into words was something a committee could vote on. You stare at the shelf and wonder how many kids are sitting at home right now, feeling the exact thing you once felt. That strange, quiet terror of not having the words to explain yourself, even to your own reflection. You think about the kid who might have been you, 13, 14, skin crawling with shame. They didn't choose. Searching for one sentence that says, "You're not broken," but they'll never find it. Because someone, somewhere, decided it was inappropriate. So now they sit in their room, scrolling, hiding, crying in silence, believing they're alone, believing the story they're living isn't a story worth telling. And slowly, the silence takes over again. Not just in schools, not just in libraries, but in bedrooms, in mirror reflections, in identities that vanish before they ever get the chance to form. You leave the library with nothing in your hands. No books, no answers, no names for the ghosts still following you, but something stays with you. Something bitter, something quiet, something you can't shake. If no one is allowed to write your story, how long before you forget how to live it? It doesn't hit you all at once. Erasure is slow. It doesn't bleed. It dissolves. You start to notice it in the way you talk, the way you correct yourself mid-sentence, the way your voice tightens anytime you say something that sounds too real, too raw, too you. You weren't born with shame. It was planted, watered, groomed carefully by the things they let you read, and more dangerously, by the things they didn't. You walk through life carrying questions with no vocabulary. What does it mean to love differently? What does it mean to exist outside the script? What does it mean to feel like your own skin is a costume sewn by someone else? But every time you try to speak, the words fall apart because they were never given to you. They were banned before they could enter your bloodstream. And the mind doesn't fight what it doesn't know. You stare at yourself in the mirror and try to name what's wrong, but all you hear are echoes, not of slurs, not of insults, but of nothing. The nothing that was there instead of stories that could have shown you a map through this maze of identity. Instead of books that could have whispered, "You're not a mistake." The nothing that sat on the shelves where truth should have lived. And it gets worse because eventually you start to internalize the silence. You become your own censor. You flinch at your own thoughts. You bury your own instincts before anyone else can shame them. You think you're protecting yourself, but really, you're finishing the work they started. Self-erasure, self-doubt, self-correction until there's no self left to protect. And maybe the most violent part is that nobody sees the crime. There's no outrage over a story that was never written. No protests for a life that never got the words to describe itself. They think the world is calm now, that everything is cleaner, that kids are safer. But safety, in this context, just means silence, just means sameness, just means fear dressed up as tradition. And the cost? It's paid by the child who never finds themselves in a story, by the teen who hides until hiding becomes their personality, by the adult who grows up numb, haunted by an unnamed grief for the person they were never allowed to become. Because when you take away someone's language, you don't just censor their words, you steal their memory, their truth, their mirror, and without that mirror, every reflection becomes a lie. You sit in your room at night, older now, and try to imagine who you might have been. If they had just left the pages where they were, if someone had handed you a book and said, "Here, this is you, and you're allowed to exist," but that page is gone, ripped out, lost somewhere between politics and fear, and all that's left is a hollow where your identity should be. And the question that keeps coming back, no matter how many years go by, who might I have become? If they hadn't taught me to disappear, silence has a way of shaping you. Not like clay, but like erosion. You don't notice the pieces being taken. You just wake up one day and there's less of you than there was before. Not because of trauma, not because of violence, but because of absence, because of all the things you were never allowed to hear, to read, to speak. They don't need to punish you to control you. All they need to do is edit your reality. Carefully, systematically, book by book, word by word, until the version of the world you're left with is sanitized, flattened, empty. You go to school. You're told to be curious, but only within the lines. You're told to ask questions, but only the ones they already know the answers to. Everything else gets labeled too complex, too adult, too political. But you're not too young to feel shame. You're not too young to feel different. You're not too young to feel erased. You just don't have the language to say why. And that's the trap. Because once you've been raised without the words to name your truth, you start to believe the lie that it never existed. The soul doesn't die from pain. It dies from contradiction, from feeling something so intensely and being told it's not real. You sit in church, you sit in school, you sit at dinner with your family, and every place tells you, this is what love looks like. This is what normal looks like. This is what truth looks like, but it doesn't look like you. And so you start to wonder if you're the error, you stop writing, you stop dreaming, you stop reaching. Because what's the point of imagining a future that no one believes should exist? They think silence is neutral, but silence, when weaponized, is violence. It tells you who matters. It tells you who is allowed to be remembered. It tells you who is safe to mourn and who must vanish quietly. And for every book removed, there's a child who learns to remove themselves. Not with a rope, not with pills, but with silence. They sit in their room, scrolling past versions of themselves from somewhere else. Places where books aren't banned, where stories are messy and human and loud. And they wonder, why not here? Why not me? But they never say it out loud because they've already learned that some questions get you labeled. Some truths get you punished. Some stories get you deleted. So they stay quiet. They become what the system wants most, invisible. And that's how the silence survives. Not by force, but by inheritance, passed down like a broken heirloom from one generation of muted souls to the next, until someone breaks it, until someone screams in the language that was almost erased. But until then, the silence keeps teaching, and the soul keeps forgetting who it was. The fire isn't red anymore. It doesn't crackle. It doesn't smell like smoke. It hums quietly in policy documents. It whispers in committee meetings. It lives in the hands that stamp removed from circulation and in the silence that follows. You don't have to burn books. If you convince people they should never be written, and that's where we are now. Not in an age of flames, but in an age of slow disappearance, a quiet, deliberate unmaking of thought. You walk through the city and see a library with its lights on. It looks the same. The bricks, the windows, the shelves, but inside, something's missing. Not just books, not just stories, possibility. You realize the real damage isn't the loss of what was. It's the loss of what could have been, the poems that were never composed, the lives that were never imagined. The kids who grew up thinking their pain was unnameable because no one had the courage to print it. And in their silence, they learned that their pain was shameful, that their desire was wrong, that their existence was too much. Not because they were told so, but because nothing ever said otherwise. That's the deadliest kind of censorship, the kind that looks like order. That wears a smile. That says we're just protecting the children. While systematically erasing the ones who need protecting most, you look back and wonder how many stories you could have written if someone had just told you, yes, you are allowed to speak. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to name yourself. You are allowed to be seen. But no one did. So you didn't. You stayed small, careful, unwritten. You learned how to mimic the acceptable, how to quote the permitted, how to bury the rest. And now, years later, you sit with your hands on a blank page and realize it's not just books that were banned. It was futures. It was healing. It was the courage to say, I exist, even if you wish I didn't. You wonder how many lives will end before they even begin, not with death, but with erasure. Not a flame, but a whisper. Not censorship, but absence. And the saddest part is, no one would know what's missing. Because when you erase a story before it's told, you also erase the grief. There will be no mourning. For books that were never written, no outrage. For the child who never found a voice, no protest. For the soul that stayed silent, because silence was all it ever knew. Just a clean shelf, a quiet school, and a future that forgot how to imagine itself.